As the courtroom settles, your support truly helps. Subscribe, tap the like button, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from.
My father always said, respect starts with how you enter a room. That day, one woman forgot that. It was a regular morning in municipal court, the kind that usually fades from memory the moment you take off the robe. The room was quiet in the familiar way, paper whispering, as people sorted tickets and notices, short answers spoken carefully, a few nervous coughs that tried not to interrupt. Folks sat tense but obedient, the way everyday people do when they've never been in a courtroom enough to feel comfortable. And I remember thinking, as I scanned my list, mornings like this rarely leave a mark, but sometimes a single entrance changes the whole temperature. She came in with quick steps, confident and fast, like she was late for something more important than everyone else's trouble. 40-something, put together, not flashy, controlled. She didn't pause to orient herself, didn't look for guidance, didn't acknowledge the room. She moved straight to a seat and dropped into it sharply, letting out a demonstrative sigh as if the very act of being here was an insult. Her shoulders were tight. Her chin stayed lifted. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They floated over the courtroom, past faces, past worry, as if all of it was beneath her line of sight. I felt it immediately. She wasn't nervous. She was offended she had to show up at all. On paper, the case was ordinary, a standard municipal matter, nothing criminal, nothing that should have set her apart from the people clutching receipts and praying under their breath. But her tone, before she even spoke, carried that quiet message. This must be a mistake, and I shouldn't be the one paying for it. When I opened her file, she glanced at her watch, slowly, deliberately. Then she shook her head, just once, like the court had failed her personally. A small thing, but contempt is made of small things. And then I noticed something that didn't match the confidence. Her lips were pressed tight, not with patience, but with restraint. Her fingers were interlocked so hard the knuckles whitened, then relaxed, then tightened again. Behind the certainty was something else, fear of losing control. I watched her the way a judge learns to watch over decades, not for the story she wanted to tell, but for the truth her body couldn't hide. And as I prepared to call the next name, I realized this wasn't going to be one of those mornings that disappears, because she hadn't even spoken yet, and the courtroom already felt like it was in her way. While I handled the cases ahead of hers, I kept her in the corner of my eye. I've learned you can tell a lot about a person before they ever reach the podium, especially in the waiting. A young man stood in front of me, fumbling with his words, cheeks burning as he tried to explain a mistake. An older woman asked for time to pay, voice thin but determined. Someone else apologized twice, like saying it again might make it true. The courtroom moved in that steady rhythm of ordinary lives brushing up against rules. And she sat there like she was watching a slow show. Every few minutes her eyes rolled upward. Not dramatically, just enough to register contempt. She sighed at the wrong moments, the way a person sighs when they believe their time is more valuable than yours. Once, when a man struggled to find the right sentence, she murmured something under her breath. It wasn't loud enough for the record, but it was loud enough for the people nearest her to stiffen. I remember thinking, respect for the court begins with respect for other people's time. Then she crossed the first real boundary. Without raising her voice, without turning it into a scene, she interrupted from her seat. Can we move this along? Not a question. A command dressed as impatience. The room reacted in the quiet way people do when they don't feel safe reacting loudly. A few heads turned. Someone's shoulders tightened. The tension didn't explode, it thickened like air before a storm. Even the people who'd been staring at their tickets looked up, suddenly aware that this wasn't just about who was next on the list. I didn't answer her. I let the silence do the work. I held it longer than comfort allows, long enough for her to feel the weight of the room settling on her words. My father taught me that sometimes you don't correct disrespect with volume, you correct it with stillness. Stillness tells a person, you don't control this. She shifted in her seat, just slightly. Her jaw tightened. And in that moment, I understood what was really happening. She wasn't simply in a hurry. She expected an exception. Some people break rules because they're careless, some because they're desperate, and some because they believe the rules are for everyone else. The way she waited, evaluating, sighing, intruding, showed me she belonged to that third group. I called her name, her head snapped up. Quick, sharp, no apology, no softening. She rose as if she'd been waiting for the world to finally recognize her place in it. And as she walked toward the front, I could see it plainly now in her posture and her eyes. She wasn't coming to explain. She was coming to be accommodated. I began the way I always do, with the basics. What happened, when it happened, why she believed the citation was wrong. She answered quickly, almost before I finished each question. Her words were sharp, trimmed of anything she considered unnecessary. The tone wasn't defensive, it was instructional, like she was correcting a misunderstanding that never should have reached her. I listened, and I watched. Her hands moved in short, clipped gestures, palms turning up as if the facts were obvious. Her voice shifted mid-sentence, calm one moment, edge the next. When she spoke about the officer, she didn't say his name. She said that man, then corrected herself like courtesy had slipped out by accident. I've learned over the years that anger often wears the mask of confidence. It's louder that way. There was a small inconsistency in her explanation. Not a lie, nothing that clean, just a detail that changed shape when she repeated it. First it was a few minutes, then it was barely any time at all. Then it was long enough to finish what she needed to do. Each version sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they didn't sit right. The room felt it too. People stopped shifting. The air tightened. The officer stood quietly, hands folded, not inserting himself where he didn't belong. He didn't need to. I paused, longer than usual. Silence does something interesting in a courtroom. It removes momentum. It forces a person to hear their own thoughts. I watched her during that pause. She broke eye contact first. Her jaw clenched. Her shoulders lifted, then set again, and then she pushed. Her voice rose, not a shout, but louder, harder. The words came faster, layered with frustration. She started to argue not just the facts, but the process itself. Why this mattered. Why it was being treated seriously. Why she had to explain something so minor. That was the moment I recognized the shift. This was no longer about a citation. When people feel their advantage slipping, they don't usually retreat. They apply pressure. They look for leverage. They test boundaries to see which ones bend. As she spoke over her own breath, I felt a familiar thought settle in a lesson my father never said outright, but lived every day. When someone stops listening, it's because they've decided the answer should favor them. I didn't interrupt her. I let her finish. And when she finally stopped expecting response, expecting movement in her direction, I realized we were standing right at the edge of something important, because the next thing she chose to do wouldn't just explain her case. It would reveal how she believed the world was supposed to work. I let the silence sit between us a moment longer than she expected. In that quiet, I could see her weighing her options, deciding whether patience would serve her or pressure. She chose pressure. She leaned forward sharply, elbows close to the podium, a tight smile forming that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice rose just enough to carry authority without sounding like a shout. It was practiced, controlled irritation. My husband works for this department, she said. I don't think you want problems over something this small. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't an insult. It was a warning wrapped in advice. And the moment she finished, she leaned back in her chair as if the matter was settled. Her hands relaxed, her shoulders dropped, her confidence returned, not earned, but assumed. She looked at me with the expression of someone who believes they've just played the right card. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't react outwardly at all. But inside, I felt the shift. In that second, she stopped defending herself. She started trying to run the courtroom. The room went completely still. People who had been shifting in their seats froze. Papers stopped moving. Even the officer straightened slightly, then caught himself and stood neutral again. Everyone understood this wasn't about a citation anymore. This was about the integrity of the room. As I looked out, my eyes caught someone I hadn't noticed before, an older man sitting quietly near the back. Plain clothes, worn jacket, hands folded carefully in his lap. He wasn't watching her. He was looking down, his face tight with something that looked like shame. Later, I would learn he was a veteran waiting for his case to be called. But in that moment, his reaction told me everything. He wasn't offended for himself. He was embarrassed for what the law was being asked to tolerate. I thought of my father then, not in words, but in feeling. He believed that power shows itself most clearly when someone assumes they don't need to earn it. I looked back at her. She was waiting, not nervously, not angrily, confidently, and I knew there was no turning back from what she just said. I looked at her directly, not to challenge her, not to embarrass her, just to bring the conversation back to where it belonged. Ma'am, I said calmly, in this courtroom, no one outranks the law. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain myself twice. The words didn't need reinforcement. They were simply true. I could feel the room lean into that sentence. Not dramatically, quietly. People weren't waiting for punishment. They were waiting for clarity. I continued, steady and measured, explaining what her words meant without dressing them up or tearing them down. Any attempt to influence a court by invoking personal connections, any suggestion that consequences should change because of who someone knows, isn't a misunderstanding. It's something that has to be acknowledged formally. And I'm required to take that very seriously, I said. That was the moment the confidence left her. The smile disappeared first. It didn't fade, it dropped. She swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked down toward the podium just for a second, but it was the first time she'd looked anywhere but forward. Her shoulders tightened again, this time not with control, but with realization. This wasn't remorse, not yet. This was the understanding that her words now lived somewhere she couldn't pull them back from. I clarified one thing carefully, because facts matter more than impressions. Her husband wasn't a department head. He wasn't in a position of authority over the court. He was a deputy, one of many. No leverage, no influence, no shortcut. The card she thought she'd played turned out to be blank. I saw it register on her face. The calculation stopped. The path she'd assumed existed simply wasn't there. From the gallery, a quiet voice broke the silence. "Thank you, Your Honor." It came from the older man I'd noticed earlier, the one sitting with his hands folded, waiting patiently. He didn't look at her when he spoke. He didn't look at me either. He looked straight ahead, like he was speaking to the room itself. It wasn't applause. It wasn't support for me. It was gratitude that the idea of fairness hadn't been compromised. I returned my attention to her. There was nothing left to expose, nothing left to escalate. I ruled on the original matter fairly, proportionally, exactly as the law required. No added punishment. No mercy requested or given. And her statement was entered into the record where it belonged. She stood there silently now, not defiant, not apologetic, just still. In all my years on the bench, I've learned that the most powerful moment in a courtroom isn't when someone is corrected loudly, it's when they understand, quietly, that the rules apply to them too. And that understanding had finally arrived. She stood there after the ruling, hands resting on the edge of the podium, eyes fixed on a point somewhere below the seal on the wall. No protest, no apology, no last attempt to recover what she'd lost. The confidence that had carried her into the room was gone, not shattered, just set aside, like something that no longer worked here. Her shoulders were lower now, not slumped, not defeated in a dramatic way, just human, the kind of posture people have when they realize they can't negotiate gravity. I called the next case because that's what the law requires. Courtrooms don't pause for reflection, they move forward. But I noticed she didn't leave right away. She stayed where she was for a moment longer than necessary, as if standing up too quickly might draw attention she no longer wanted. When she finally turned to go, she didn't look at the gallery, she didn't look at the officer, and she didn't look at me. She walked out quietly, the sharp edge gone from her steps. The room felt different after that. Not lighter, cleaner. People shifted again. Someone exhaled without realizing it. A woman gathered her papers more calmly. No one clapped, and that mattered. Applause would have cheapened it. This wasn't a victory, it was a correction. I finished the docket that morning the same way I always do, case by case, name by name, but that moment stayed with me. Months later, a short letter crossed my desk. No return address that mattered, no explanation, just a few lines, written carefully, without emotion or excuse. She thanked the court for clarity and for a lesson she hadn't expected to learn that way. Nothing more. I didn't respond. Judges rarely do. But I understood the letter wasn't asking for anything. It was simply closing a chapter. Over the years, I've thought about that morning more than I expected to. Not because of what she said, but because of what the room learned together. Courts don't exist to humble people. They exist to remind us of something fragile and essential, that equality isn't a slogan, it's a practice. My father used to tell me that respect isn't demanded, it's demonstrated. He believed the way you walk into a room tells people how you expect to be treated, but the way you walk out tells them who you really are. That woman walked in believing the rules could be adjusted to her life. She walked out knowing her life had to adjust to the rules. That isn't cruelty, it's balance. And balance, in the end, is what keeps justice standing when everything else tries to lean. Because justice doesn't need to raise its voice. It only needs to refuse to move.